behalf of the Human Rights Law Centre and the Castan Centre for Human Rights Law, can I welcome you very warmly to this seminar on human rights and social media. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin nations. Very shortly I'll introduce and welcome our panellists. But if I can start briefly by introducing myself and the topic. My name is Phil Lynch, I'm from the Human Rights Law Centre. When Mark Zuckerberg, or the Winklevoss twins, depending on whose side of history you take, created the Facebook as it then was, to increase basically fraternisation amongst Harvard University students, little could they have known that less than 10 years later, seismic democratic uprisings in the Middle East were being attributed at least in part to the power of social media such as Facebook. Similarly, just 5 years ago, when Jack Dorsey created Twitter and informed the world through his first tweet that he had established a new tool for, quote, short bursts of inconsequential information and bird-like chiefs, he's unlikely to have had in mind the so-called current Twitter revolutions. Of course, there's a real tendency with new technologies to overclaim. Thus, commentators such as Evgeny Morozov not only decry the notion of a Facebook or Twitter revolution, but also argue that while social media can be a useful tool to coordinate social action, it can also stymie such action and even be used as a tool for state repression. So with today's seminar, we're aiming to grapple with some of these issues. We'll look to discuss first the ways in which social media can be used and is being used by the human rights movement. We'll discuss the impact and the utility of social media in promoting and protecting human rights. And we'll discuss some of the risks and challenges associated with using social media for progressive social action. We have four very eminent panellists to discuss this topic today. Starting on my left, Professor Sarah Joseph, who many of you will know is the Director of the Castan Centre for Human Rights Law, which is without doubt the leading academic human rights law centre in the Asia-Pacific region. She's a regular commentator, blogger and tweeter on international and domestic human rights issues. Sam McLean, who's the Deputy National Director of GetUp, which is, of course, an independent community organisation which acts to engage and mobilise Australians to take action on a diverse range of progressive social issues, whether it's climate change, onerous bank fees, or the need for a National Human Rights Act. Alex Pagliaro, who's the Refugee Campaign Coordinator of Amnesty International Australia, which is, of course, not only a leading human rights NGO, but also one which uses social media extensively to coordinate, mobilise, and engage in human rights advocacy and campaigning. And finally, Jonathan Green, who would be known to many of you as the editor of ABC's The Drum. He's worked as a senior writer of The Age, an editor of The Sunday Age, and also an editor of Crikey. And his Twitter profile reveals that Jonathan is a nemesis of pirates. I'm sure he can explain what that means. In terms of the format for today, I'm going to ask Sarah to provide a brief 15-minute introduction to the topic of human rights and social media, and perhaps venture some very tentative responses to the question, will the revolution be tweeted? I'll then invite each of our four panellists to provide a short 2 or 3 minute response to and some reflections on the role of social media in promoting and protecting human rights. And then it's over to you, the audience, for hopefully almost an hour of very interactive, energetic Q&A style discussion with our panellists. We've got the roving mic to go around the room, so please raise your hand and the roving mic will be brought to you. And for those of you on Twitter or following Twitter, you can comment and follow the discussion using the hashtag on the screen, SMHR social media. So without further ado, over to you, Sarah.
I'm going to be speaking mainly about this issue of Twitter and revolutions, using the context, I suppose, fairly obviously, of the revolution in fervour, which has been sweeping across the Arab world this year. And the role of social media, particularly in the context of Egypt and Tunisia, has been lauded with the term Twitter revolution becoming commonplace. And indeed, it's as if Twitter and Facebook are becoming the equivalent of protesting media deserve those plaudits. After all, we've had unarmed and very inspiring revolutions before, long before Web 2.0. For example, we had the Filipinos in 1986, overthrowing Marcos, the fall of the Communist bloc in 1989, and the demonstrations which preceded the fall of Suharto in 1997. Indeed, given that so many Western activists are on Twitter and Facebook, or on social media, are we narcissistically trying to inject ourselves into the picture, believing that we're somehow involved in what's happening in profound events on the ground elsewhere? Now, one prominent skeptic is this fellow, the New Yorker's Malcolm Gladwell. He argues that real social change is brought about by high-risk, meaningful activism, like the civil rights movement in the United States in the 60s, the Indigenous freedom rights and the Green Bans in Australia. Such movements, according to Gladwell, are characterised by strong group identity and cohesion, what he calls strong ties. In contrast, he says that social media connections through things like Facebook and Twitter promote weak ties and low-risk activism, so-called slacktivism. It gives people a false idea that by liking something, that you're achieving something when you like something on Facebook, or when you retweet someone else's private outrage. And in his words, Facebook activism succeeds not by motivating people to make a real sacrifice, but by motivating them to do the things people do when they're not motivated enough to make a real sacrifice. He also argues that social media is too disorganised to be an effective activist tool. It encourages loose networks rather than strategic hierarchies. And he says that loose networks aren't particularly good at setting goals and adopting useful strategies for revolutionary change. And he gives a fairly chilling example, the example of Al-Qaeda, which is a rather extreme form of activism, saying that it was far more effective as a unified hierarchy than as a loose network. Gladwell also argues that social media is a conservative force in promoting activism. It distracts people from real activism. Again, in his words, it makes it easier for activists to express themselves, but harder for that expression to have any impact. Now, contrasted with Gladwell is the view of NYU academic Clay Sheikh. He claims that social media is an unusually effective organising tool. One indication, and I think he's right here, that social media is unusually effective, is that certain governments are clearly afraid of it, and we can clearly see that in China right now. And you could also see how Egypt immediately shut down the internet at the very beginning of the protests. Sheikh argues that the formation of a vibrant civil society in the public sphere is a two-step process. Now, access to information, and this is where Web 1.0 is very useful, things like Google and other online media. Access to information in the media is the first step. But the second step is active debate and what he calls conversation about that information. And he says it is at that second step that one forms committed political opinions. As Sheikh puts it, access to information is less important than access to conversation. We need both, and in his view, particularly the latter, to develop strong civil societies and spheres of public debate, which are essential to a healthy democratic culture and revolutionary change in a democratic state. I would add it's also easier to want change and be prepared to do something about it when you know that others feel the same way. And social media is a great facilitator of mass conversation. Sure, there's a lot of trivia, but there is also a lot of churning real debate. And rather than just one-to-one conversation, or one-to-many, which is how I might characterise email, social media enables many-to-many communication, which facilitates strong synchronised actions by those many. It also spreads the capacity to document human rights abuses beyond the mainstream media in the many areas where the internet has now reached. These days, in those areas, anyone in the vicinity with a mobile phone can photograph and video brutality and spread it on the net, and in many cases, with some mobiles, they can do that almost instantaneously. And then that, of course, starts more conversations both within and outside the relevant country. One beauty, too, in social media tools for shirking is that shutting them down can be quite difficult and can also entail great costs for a country. Shutting down the internet and the mobile phone networks has great economic costs, as Egypt discovered. And it can also upset those who are pro-government or who are apathetic. Part of this, and I like this, is what is called the cute cat theory of digital activism. That it might be easy to shut down a single activist proxy server, but it's harder to shut down a popular site where people share photographs of cute cats. So turning then to the Arab uprisings, how did social media play out in those events? Well, it didn't cause the revolutions. The general cause is clearly mass dissatisfaction with terrible rule, and probably a more recent catalyst is extremely high food prices, or unusually high food prices, and a dire economy. But turning to, if you like, the first domino, Tunisia. In early December, WikiLeaks, you can't keep seeing the sunshine of the picture these days, WikiLeaks poured fuel on that fire by highlighting the luxury and corruption of the Ben Ali regime, of course, the Ben Alis. Now, that corruption was probably widely known in Tunisia, but now it was really shoved in people's faces and became a rallying point for anti-government conversations, both virtual and real. Then, 10 days later, we had the tragic and desperate self-immolation of the fruit seller Mohamed Bouazizi in the town of Sidi Bouzid in Tunisia. Now, normally such an event, or often such an event, simply passes unnoticed, except, of course, for friends and relatives. But that event spread all over the net, initially just in Tunisia, but then eventually further, sparking conversations, and that is in the language of Turkey, but also expressions of mass outrage. And those outraged comments grew into the mass demonstrations which overthrew Ben Ali just under a month later, on January 14. And you can see here, this is a copy of a tweet from someone called Wael Nobel from Tunisia. I like the fact that he's calling out to Stephen Fry. This is from December 31, when not many people were actually following what was happening in Tunisia. And he's calling out to Stephen Fry. I'll explain that in a second. Are you following what's going on in Tunisia? It's odd why Western media has turned its face away, unlike in Iran last year. And you can see he's using the hashtag Sidi Bouzid, so they really use this incident of the fruit sellers to mobilise. Why is he calling out to Stephen Fry? Well, Stephen Fry is a very prominent and prolific Twitterer who has about 1 million followers. And if I don't know if he did pick it up, but when Stephen Fry does pick something up, a lot of people notice. So that was December 31, and only 2 weeks later, you have this scene in Tunisia with the resignation and rapid passing into exile of the Ben Alis. Now, I was watching Twitter that day, and I have to say the joy and the feeling, there was this joy and the feeling that we can do it too, suddenly all over the place. And you can see this quite prescient tweet from a CNN reporter, Dima Khatib. No Arab leader is sleeping tonight. Sidi Bouzid has invaded their bedrooms, and that's from the 15th of January, 10 days before the protests in Egypt even began. And then this one, this is actually, I'm proud of this one because this one's from the Castan Centre. This is from the 24th of January. Egyptian bloggers buzz over day of protest on January 25. Watch this space. And of course, a mere 17 days later, we have the overthrowing of Mubarak. And you can see, you probably can't see very well, but down below here you've got a group of Egyptians thanking Facebook, and you've got a woman raising a sign about Twitter. Now, and where do we go from here? We're not quite sure. Of course, Yemen, Bahrain, there's a lot of countries in play at the moment. Now, on February 13, the New York Times wrote an article detailing how the ostensible leaders, including expatriates of the Egyptian protests, had been planning to use social media to organise peaceful protests in the genuine belief that non-violent struggle would in fact bring down the Mubarak government. After they saw what happened in Tunisia, they chose January 25 as the day of protest, as that was in fact a public holiday. It seems likely that they thought that would be the beginning of a much more drawn-out process, rather than one which would rapidly snowball and lead to the resignation of Hosni Mubarak only 17 days later. The article also talks of interesting connections between Tunisian and Egyptian activists. For example, the former were able to get important information through, such as tips on how to cope with tear gas. For the record, can wear a scarf doused in vinegar, onion and Pepsi. Now, bearing in mind Gladwell's comments about social media building networks rather than hierarchies, it's interesting to note that the Arab protests seem to have lacked a hierarchy. Traditional opposition bodies, like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, came to the protests late and had little, and I actually suspect nothing, to do with their organisation. The leaders, and probably more appropriate to say organisers, were instead people like this man, Wael Goni, who was a Google executive who set up the website We Are All Coloured Slave in honour of a young man who was beaten to death by the Egyptian police in 2010. And that's a screenshot of the actual website. Now, Goni helped the protests to start, but he didn't. I mean, one couldn't say he led them. For a start, no one really knew who he was, and he disappeared early on for the first 12 days. He was actually arrested by the police, and so he wasn't actually involved in the protests for a long time. His release, though, did give an extra fillip to the protests at a time when they looked like they were waning. So, despite Gladwell's arguments, this fairly weak network managed to overthrow Hosni Mubarak. But where Gladwell's theory may be more relevant is now in the aftermath, because there is a lot of fear that the revolution will be co-opted by better organised but more conservative groups, like Mubarak's old political party and like the Muslim Brotherhood, and that it might be taken out of the hands of the youth who brought about the revolution in the first place. I think, we've just got to wait and see. It's easy to be pessimistic, and I, for one, don't underestimate the capacity of the protesters to get back out on the streets if they don't like how things are panning out. Now, another critic, and Phil mentioned him in the opening, another critic of social media and revolutions is exemplified by people like Evgeny Morozov, who's a scholar at Stanford. And he's argued that just as it can facilitate pro-democracy actions, it can also be a tool of oppression. For example, Iran and Belarus have used the internet to identify, locate and target dissidents. It may be happening now in Bahrain, and I think it's fairly clear it's happening in China. Cell phones and GPS systems make it very easy to track people. I think this just shows that revolution is always a dangerous business, and that social media can in fact be high risk. A Twitter revolution will find it very hard to succeed if a regime responds with serious brutal force, such as Iran in 2009. Now, early last year, in early 2010, Hillary Clinton committed the US to the promotion of cyber activism across the world. But it's not really that easy. For example, there was a major blunder by the US when it facilitated the export of a particular type of technology, supposedly privacy protecting and censorship circumventing, and it went horribly wrong when it turned out not to be particularly secure, and it put its users in grave peril. And just as there can be information, there can be misinformation, and just as there are pro-democracy forces, there are the opposite. And we've seen, just as text messages can be used to organise protests in the Philippines or Spain, they can also help to organise them in other riots. And I think this just demonstrates that the platforms are neutral and can be used for both good and bad causes. And in response, I can only offer the traditional pro-speech argument that hopefully such speech can be, that bad speech is drowned out by good speech, and that the cream rises to the top. Now, my final point to note is that these social media platforms are private businesses. Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, Vodafone, they're all private companies. What are the social or human rights responsibilities of these bodies with regard to their users? Is it appropriate to place so much faith in these bodies as the facilitators or even guardians of a revolution? What if they're against a revolution? Status quo often suits big business. Recently we've seen the United States subpoena Twitter to hand over information about certain users who are associated with WikiLeaks. Now, Twitter informed those users who are now taking court action, but I think a key point is that Twitter didn't have to. And it could have just handed over the information without those users knowing. And I think we can all wonder how many times has that actually happened without the knowledge of the relevant people. In one famous instance a few years ago, Yahoo helped China, or allegedly helped China, to identify a dissident blogger. This led to great concern over the corporate social responsibility of internet companies, and it led to the creation of a global initiative to protect human rights. and those who originally signed this code were Google, Yahoo and Microsoft. 3 years later, there's still only those 3 members. Nobody else, not Facebook, not Twitter, nobody has joined. In the Arab revolutions, the behaviour of Google has largely been praised. With Twitter, it helped to set up a speak-to-tweet service to get around Egyptian restrictions on the internet in the early days of the protests. And Twitter has been openly very proud of its role in the revolutions. And YouTube helped to curate the videos from Egypt to make them more accessible and searchable. Whereas in contrast, Facebook has not publicly embraced the revolutions. It's been asked to change its policy on anonymity on the basis that this might threaten human rights activists, and it has refused to do so. And it clearly was openly ambivalent, if that's possible, and perhaps even confused about its role regarding human rights and revolutions. And so, to conclude on whether these revolutions were treated. Social media, I think, clearly played a big role in galvanising and organising protesters. And it helped to break down the tight controls that certain states had over information and communication. So one point is maybe it's actually more useful in such states than in relatively open states in organising because there's no other choice. Its weak activism led to serious risk-taking by thousands under some of the world's most oppressive regimes. I can't say whether the revolutions would have or could have happened without social media. I think they would have happened in a different way and probably would have been a lot harder. And I'm going to conclude by, of course, showing you some pictures of some cute cats.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for the excellent presentation. You've raised a huge number of issues about which no doubt we'll have extensive discussion. But if I can start by asking each of our panellists, perhaps starting with you, Sam, once the microphone gets here, to give your brief response to and thoughts on some of those key issues that Sarah's raised.
Sure. So much to say, and I'll keep it to 2 minutes, so I'll start off by talking briefly about Malcolm Gladwell and the points that he raises, because a lot of people with whom I work for GetUp, so we keep an eye out for these sorts of arguments about whether social media matters when it comes to activism. They're very pissed off by Malcolm Gladwell's articles saying that basically what we do for a living doesn't make a difference. Personally, I think he has a point, and that his major beef is, look, this is light touch stuff, and real change happens when you have strongly knitted communities who can take more high risk actions and do their own strategizing. And he comes from a world of kind of old school organising, the kind of rules for radicals, Wellstone model, union model in the States of organising, which I have a lot of time for. And their process has been quite clearly theorised and articulated over 50 years of people writing books like Rules for Radicals that kind of theorise what's going on in this movement. And the most important thing that I take away from those books when I read them is that they have this kind of ladder of engagement theory, where you're taking people on this journey from not being engaged to being strategizers who lead a movement into that. And there are steps along the way. And there are different ways of articulating them. But the first step is information. The second step is identification and social reinforcement. This is where you say, yes, I'm the kind of person who does this sort of thing. The third step is sharing that with friends, providing social reinforcement, being a recruiter. The fourth is acting, being part of something that somebody else's strategy that somebody else has conceived. And the last step is strategizing, being part of making a strategy. 5 steps. But there are different ways of articulating. And the first 2 steps are information and identification. Right? And these are the steps that have fallen away from those organisers who use this kind of Wellstone model, because they were the steps that local communities provided, sharing information through town hall meetings and through union networks and other social movements that have kind of collapsed in a lot of ways. So information and identification, the feeling that you are part of a movement and you identifies the kind of person that takes action. Those steps have fallen away. But in their place, I think that's where social media plays a really important role. I'll come to other points later, but I think that all of us who work in this space ought really heed the arguments that Global and others put forward. They have a lot of merit. But I think they also need to remember that, that they can, these tools can work with their old models of organising as well.
Pagliaro from Amnesty International.
I agree with that absolutely. You stole many of my points then. So I'm going to talk more broadly about how a big organisation like Amnesty can play a role in this, because in a way it's a social media movement is very ground up. It's people being outraged, sharing information, and that leading on to action, and through those steps, weak ties do definitely lead to strong ties. That's kind of the point. But in that, it might be hard to see how a massive NGO that's all around the world and hundreds of staff and researchers can play a part in that. But really, for Amnesty, it's perfect, because that's where we came from, and that's we started with little letter writing groups, meeting in churches and meeting in their backyards or all around the world, providing letters for forgotten people on the other side of the world, and kind of trying to be a voice for them. And so in today's world, that's you can still do that, but you can only be so effective. You can only reach so many people. Whereas social media is it is neutral, as has already been said. It's not a force for good. It's not a force for evil. It's a force of communication, and that's how it needs to be used. And I think Amnesty's role in this is to continue to do research, because that's what we do, and we get that information. And I think we need those organisations to filter through the masses of information that come out. And there's a difference between that real-time response, where you just want people on the ground talking to you, and the difference between finding all that information and analysing it and breaking it down into something that is understandable for the entire world, and can use those responses and what has just happened to make sure that the right path is taken, and that social media and what has happened does become a force for human rights. And I think we've seen that in Egypt, where Amnesty really didn't cause the revolution in Egypt. I think that's pretty safe to say. But organisations like Amnesty, like Human Rights Watch, like the UN, now have a part to play in taking what people have said and what they've done, and making sure that doesn't just turn into like a blip that then gets ignored, and another military regime comes in and starts doing what they always do. So Amnesty's role is really in highlighting those voices of people who are on the ground, and connecting them with people who are not on the ground, who are elsewhere, whether they be politicians or whether they be Australians or some random people in the UK or America or Brazil, not at all connected to the Middle East. And part of that is, and I think this is where Amnesty is going, is to develop tools to really to make that as safe as possible and as useful as possible, because we know that the dangers of social media are like any communication, is quite real, and as soon as you start becoming public about anything, you put yourself in danger, and organisations like Amnesty that do have the resources and the framework to do that have a responsibility to make sure that the human rights activists and the people that are really genuinely providing that content and the triggers for this change, the people, not the tools that are being those triggers, that they can do so in a way that doesn't put their life at risk, and then will stop more activism happening and more amazing human rights defenders speaking out.
Jonathan, will the revolution be tweeted or will it be drummed?
Certainly won't be drummed. I mean, I speak as the only person here who's not schooled in activist theory, so I'm just a journalist. And I find myself falling a bit between the Global and the Sheikh argument on this. And I think Libya at the moment is a good example of how that might apply, where you had a situation which was drawn perhaps far more quickly than might have been the case in the past to international attention through the use of various media, which nonetheless required the United Nations and a no-fly zone and bonds to make something concrete that sort of demonstrated anxiety and will of people. think that's a quarter-vision where I perhaps move more towards the Gladwell thing than to Sheik's point that at the end of the day, it did require the army in Egypt to sign a protest with the government to make what happened possible. Otherwise, there would have been massive bloodshed and they could have treated it as much as they liked. But the outcome would have been disastrous and unfortunate. A moment for me, and this is someone who's watched these streams over the last few months with some interest, was watching a stream from Bahrain from a month or so back when people were gathered at a roundabout, tweeting away at their sense of anxiety and tweeting as they saw the security forces setting themselves up on an overpass quite close and tweeting as the security forces then opened fire. And for us, sitting out on the largely Western and white imprint of social media, well, that's fairly horrifying. But we are just spectators, and the social media experience, I think, is largely our experience. It's largely watching these things happen with a few people on the ground speaking to us of what takes place. So I don't think that of itself social media is sufficient to bring change necessarily, and I think still those Gladwell's hard actions need to follow, and the recent experience, as much as it's fruit as the social media revolution, is a pretty ample demonstration of that.
Just a follow-up.
I get a follow-up.
Traditional media obviously has a very significant role to play in informing and influencing public opinion, and therefore in mobilising and affecting social change. One of the things that Sarah's timeline demonstrated was that a lot of the uprising in places like Tunisia and Egypt was picked up and communicated via social media before it was in traditional media. What role is and can social media play in setting the traditional news cycle and editorial agenda in such a way that becomes a progressive tool for social change?
I think that principle where social media is ahead of the traditional news cycle is absolutely general now. That's something which is doing a lot to erode the authority of hierarchical broadcast traditional media forms. That's fairly well known. And so obviously there's potential in that for agenda pushing or for establishing the true concerns of a broad range of people and having that necessarily taken notice of. The objective shouldn't be to have it necessarily taken notice of by the mainstream hierarchical broadcast media. I mean, the fact that it is out there and sort of the organically consumed background of modern social media-based news is sort of sufficient. People know this now. It is things can be broadly understood now much more readily and before they necessarily reach the attention of the mainstream media. I mean, that then may take a next step of then forcing those concerns to be taken with some increased seriousness. But I think the landscape is entirely shifted. The news, the events, the things that we have come to know. There's all sorts of, not only in a sort of social justice context, that has some huge implication across all sorts of areas of public policy and information forwarding.
We'll throw the floor open for questions now. Zara has a roving microphone, so if people would like to raise their hands, and we'll continue the discussion from the floor, and I'll just check with questions from the chair as well. So if you'd like to start.
To Jonathan about that attack on the roundabout in Bahrain, I guess one response would be that at least we found out about it, and we found out about it very, very quickly. And maybe if the police in attacking hadn't known, I mean, I'm sure they were aware that, okay, this is being reported in a way, it's being tweeted out, that had they, it might have been worse had the police thought, okay, no one knows about this, we can really do whatever we like. And so that, even just on its own, that's a useful thing to do. I mean, you can feel like a voyeur watching it, thinking, cannot do anything about this. But at the same time, I'm aware of that attack on the roundabout, and I think it has been said that, okay, it was a terrible tactic, but it wasn't as bad as it, one might have thought with happened in Bahrain.
Just a follow-up question I had was something I genuinely don't know what I think about. Is merely witnessing something doesn't change anything. I'm thinking actually this one in Japan recently that it's not quite involved, but the fact that people watched the tsunami hitting that coast didn't in any way change the trajectory of disaster that unfolded. And I do sometimes worry that watching these things doesn't necessarily, well, I suppose which is disappointing because they doesn't necessarily mobilise people. But I'd like to be convinced otherwise.
I would just say that maybe it's not the impact on the watcher, but it's difficult with the tsunami because that's a natural disaster. But again, just going back to the Bahrain, the effect on the people who know that others are watching is probably also an important thing, rather than just the effect on the witnesses themselves.
I think it can also have sort of an absolving effect as well. We've watched this, we're aware of it, how wrong here is done. The fact that, we can only speculate that the fact that people watching the Bahrain roundabout had some impact. They may. So you're watching, who cares? The Chinese government, for example, is a good example of a regime that knows you're watching and doesn't care. And will, the internment of the artist Weiwei, is it how you pronounce his name, just in the last couple of days, is an extraordinary example of that. He's a guy whose son's sees filled with Tate Modern, who's an international person of extraordinary fame and repute, who gets locked up. And we can tweet it and blog it and everything else. And I think the Japanese thing is a really good example too, because we watch this and we sort of feel connected, we feel like we've empathised, and we sort of roll on. And this can happen with protests too. We watch this unfold, we run a hash whatever stream on our tweet decks, and that's sort of that's the extent of our involvement. Maybe that's as far as we feel we can retake it. We're sort of somehow done it. Obviously not.
Well, I think a lot of the time that's right. Look, watching an event and you can you might tweet about it, you can like it, and you've done your part, you're involved, and you can go about your daily business knowing that you are connected to the world and that sort of thing. But I was actually quite surprised recently when we were looking through the WikiLeaks information and looking for, we obviously went through as an organisation and pulled out the Amnesty stuff that was through there, and one of the really fascinating things that we found was governments, mainly the Chinese, knowing which of their prisoners were Amnesty case files. So were people that, like little groups of, 3 or 4 people, school groups, all our little letter writing groups around the world, would write letters. They sit down, they write a letter once a month, once a week to this person or to the government or to another relevant official about someone in prison, and that's noted by the Chinese government. We get reports all the time about people that tell us that once they started receiving Amnesty letters, that their treatment changed in prison. And anecdotal information is good, but we write on behalf of tens of thousands of people around the world. But this was a really interesting insight into governments responding, or at least noting the fact that the international community was looking, and the fact that they have listed the individuals that are being watched by the international community versus the ones that aren't, I think is a step that is a signal that that this does it does have some kind of impact. And I think with that watching those things, that's where the challenge is for people on social media, for organisations like Amnesty, for anyone who's concerned, to translate that connection into actual action. And like Sam said, there are steps to do that, and obviously the vast majority of people are never going to make that step. Most people just look at it, tick, yeah, seeing that and move on. But there are people that do take that up, and Amnesty has, that's the example I know because that's where I work, but Amnesty and lots of other organisations have hundreds of committed people around the country who see things like that, and that sparks something in them, and they become committed, and they do a variety of things to really
this is a big issue for you and GetUp at the moment, isn't it, Sam? There's been a commentary on New Matilda about the GetUp model of social action with one particular article, GetUp Then What, saying, well, GetUp's really great at getting people to sign petitions, but then what? Is retweeting, is liking enough, or what do you do at GetUp to mobilise people to take real world action?
Yeah, it's not, it's something, but it's not enough. To hark back to the conversation we were having a minute ago, I think that Jenna does care that we're watching, which is why they make such strenuous efforts to stop us from watching a lot of what's going on. And part of the reason why the first move of regimes under threat now seems to be to ring Vodafone and say, can you please turn off the service? And Vodafone's sure. But to go back to James's article on New Matilda about GetUp Then What, the petition is another example. People say it's much like watching something online. You've watched it, and then what do you do? Well, you sign the petition, and then the petition gets delivered, and you identify somebody who has taken action on this issue. So it's, the first step is information, the second step is identification, right? I've signed a petition about mental health. I've identified as the kind of person who takes action on mental health. And our job at GetUp is to provide you with opportunities to then take the next step up the level of engagement. So the people who have signed the petition about mental health are people we then write back to 2 weeks later and say, thank you, your 100,000 signatures for mental health have been delivered to the Prime Minister's office, and the next step is we want to put an ad on air. Can you donate $3? And once you've donated $3, maybe next time I'll ask you for $5 to pay for the ads that go on there. And then we'll come back 2 weeks later, as this mental health campaign has progressed, and say, if you have a personal experience with this issue of mental health, can you write a letter to your local paper? Can you go and visit your MP and tell them about that experience? But can we get people to, can we facilitate people and embolden people to go and sit down with their local MP and say, I lost a family member to mental illness, or I've experienced mental illness and the system let me down, without them first taking the step of signing a petition? I'd love it if I could, that would save me a lot of work.
So, just to build on some of those points, and on Sophie's earlier point about witnessing, I guess one of the things that threw up for me was the different ways in which we kind of relate communication and action. And I guess different panelists have both kind of talked about communication as quite a neutral thing, and yet at the same time as being maybe the core activity, say, the letter writing model of Amnesty. And so I was just sort of wondering, given that people talk about us sort of having a kind of mediated public sphere, is this a false dichotomy between communication and action, or are we do we need to kind of think more closely about that relationship?
If you wouldn't mind me taking first crack at that. I actually disagree that the tools are neutral. I think that social media tools and online tools are not at all neutral, and they're inherently democratic and inherently good. As an example, the movements who use social media effectively and who rely on them for creating change are more democratic because of it. If GetUp members don't, so go back to the game. Phil raised the example of a banking campaign that GetUp ran last year. As one of the things that we've been on about. We're not on about that anymore. It's kind of dropped off the radar a little bit. The reason is that people weren't taking action on it in as great numbers as there were other issues. People weren't donating to the ads, so we couldn't run as many ads. As much as it doesn't matter how much I care about the banking campaign, and it doesn't matter how much any of us who work at GetUp care about the banking campaign. If members aren't taking action on it, then it's a fizzer and it's going down. Mental health, people are always taking action on it, so we'll keep campaigning on it until that drops off. So because we rely on broadly defined social media, by which I mean email, sharing with friends and donating to pay the salary and pay the servers to keep our website up, we are all more democratic because of it. And I think that's true of everyone who relies on those methods. So I don't think they're at all neutral.
Question up the back.
I've actually got a question that's been sent in via Twitter. So the question is from Congressperson Leasley, and it is to the panel. The focus so far has been on the role of social media in communication between citizens and in the media. And could you comment a little more on what the effect is on governments and decision makers?
Interesting and variable. Interesting and variable, I think. I think there's the more people, there's an interesting thing happening if you look at the experience in Australian politics, for example, of engagement and far more information flying around. I'm beginning to sense that it has this sort of paralysing effect on big politics. That we know that it's tested and surveyed to sort of each of its life, and we know that through greater information that tested group can be more informed, more knowledgeable. And I feel it has this effect of locking our politics into sort of zero change positions. They're afraid to act, so it's sort of a downside of that increasing information, I think. It would have the opposite effect if the message was loud, coherent, and sort of universal. But it seldom is, and so it has, I think, this effect of sort of making them stand there and stare at the headlights and lose it.
Another one.
Yeah, sure. I had a comment. I had a comment about the question that Lady raised before. After I saw the footage of the tsunami in Japan, I donated money to Red Cross, and I think that, in terms of real action, that's probably what they need in Japan. And I guess that GetUp also had a pretty big visibility on my court over the closing roles and, young people not being able to get enrolled to vote for the elections. My question to the panel, though, is about the role of traditional media. I guess that the thing that I really like about Twitter is that it gives me a capacity to interact with people on the ground that is unfiltered by the media. And I wonder, so following Bahrain and Libya and Egypt and Tunisia, has been great respect to actually hear the dissidents on the ground talking without the interpretations from media. And I wonder how traditional media is going to respond to people sourcing the information that's been.
Jonathan, do you want to have a crack at that? It is a big challenge, obviously, for organisations, outlets like the ABC. Twitter is one of the main sources from which I derive my human rights news now, far more so than the Age or even the ABC. How is traditional media to respond?
I think the first thing is to probably embrace it and to, as much as Twitter might have good reach, ABC has better reach. And so for the ABC, though, to lend an ear to what's going on in various social networks is an important thing, and to give that some credence. And then to sort of, treat it with respect and rebroadcast or take up those themes is an important thing. And the traditional media model that ignores all that, I think, does it entirely with peril, and that's ignoring what people are actually talking about. It's a great opportunity for media to engage not only with its audience but with the concerns of its audience, and to develop those concerns and those arguments and to reflect them, and it just can be an amplifier on those things. I don't think that
on that, I mean, to bring it back to the Middle East stuff, if you look at how Al Jazeera operated during Egypt, and they were an incredible news source, and I already followed them, but I followed them a lot and very closely during that, and really made them my main source of news. And while those, the sort of noise of Twitter can be overwhelming, it was amazing hearing from people directly on the ground, but Al Jazeera did an amazing job of capturing that and of giving those people a platform as well, with their coverage, and they used sort of citizen journalists, if you like, and got those reports and had people blogging and videoing people, and I think that was a really good example of how the two things work together.
Yeah, just I suppose to echo that, Al Jazeera is known as a network which has jumped on board social media earlier than a lot of the other ones. And I see social media and the traditional media working together, because a lot of the people I follow are in fact journalists. And a lot of the things you read are links to links to a story somewhere else in the media. Just as an aside, I think that's going to really hurt newspapers like The Times, where you can't put a link in because of the paywall, and so they have to think about that. So I think it's very linked together. And just to toss something in the mix about the idea of following people on the ground, because I feel I've been doing that too. Who aren't journalists, who are just people on the ground in Libya. I did see one tweet once which suddenly said, "Who is this person? How do we know they're not CIA?" And I just saw it and thought, apart from the fact that I've been following them for a long time, and I think that that's who they are, but it just...
Look, they're on Facebook.
And so it is, that's kind of the dark side thing. At least I suppose one reason, that's another reason why I do also follow journalists, because I at least think they're real, or know they're real.
So before we, sorry if I could generously interject to take the opportunity, since the High Court case was mentioned here, and Phil's sitting next to me, to say that the reason that that court case got up was because a movement of people were involved and wouldn't have, and Phil was pretty much the reason that happened, and the Human Rights Law Centre and other people who are making approach and balances. So if I could just say thank you while the topic is raised and I have a chance. Thank you. Question over here.
My question is around the sort of structures in Australia that allow people to get an end result, I guess. Like in the States, if you have social media, then you can channel it into something like Proposition 8, where a small group can actually make a change in the law. And how is that going to operate in Australia when there's an election every 3 years and you've got two choices, basically?
Yeah, I mean, the proposition was in California, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Where they have that model of propositions being put to a vote, which seemed like such a good idea when it came up, and it's proven to be such a terrible idea, because everybody votes for more spending and less taxes and the state and stuff and the rest. Beware to all of us in pursuing too much democracy, I guess. I think that in the absence of those sorts of constructed moments, because campaigns do revolve around moments of climax and victory or defeat, we have to create them for ourselves. One of the, I guess, our jobs as campaigners is to identify and accentuate moments that we can build up to without things like propositions that come to a vote. We're about to get a massive gift in a referendum in a few years' time about Indigenous recognition, which is just a Christmas come early for campaigners. But outside of that, those of us who want to create change need to look for moments to which we can turn our movements and create them. So court cases are one. Political moments like the next few weeks are all about budget decisions. So now is the time to be campaigning on mental health and forests. I guess that's our job as campaigners, but for anybody who wants to use these tools to create change, the same rule applies.
Another question? Yeah. Social media
I can't answer how. Castan Centre is not such a campaigning organisation, so I can't answer how. The utility of keeping people's attention, people paying attention. I do think shortened attention span is a general problem, not just with social media, but with media, because we've got access to so much information that we, must filter it out and must, get fatigue from it. And it's just an example which might prove, that maybe, social media isn't always so good, is the Iranian demonstrations in 2009. Now, I wasn't on Twitter then, but I'm sure that was trending all over the place, and people were calling it a Twitter revolution, even though in the end it wasn't a revolution.
People even covered the avatars.
And everybody said they were based in Tehran as well, because I've got a few followers, and I think, wow, you're all in Tehran. And a lot of that was to try and confuse the Iranian government. But I wonder how much people's attention dropped off when Michael Jackson died, which was late June that year, and suddenly that would have been the biggest issue in the world. And I got the impression, at least with the normal media, which was always up with all that I was following, that it just wiped Iran off the front page and it never made it back.
Very nice.
Slightly counter thought on that, but I actually think that especially the mainstream media, its sort of adherence to the 24-hour cycle doesn't in fact flatter the intelligence of its audience. And I think that one of the things that social media has shown big media is that in fact people have abiding interests in things and can actually take a fair bit of information over a protracted period on various issues. And I think that's also one of the things which has propelled this new sort of band in big media of this sort of opinion-based journalism, which takes it again away from that sort of day-to-day news cycle stuff into let's keep talking about this, let's keep running pieces on climate, on water policy, on mental health, you name it, the sort of big ticket things which people I think will have a sense that in our community are unresolved and awkward and will tolerate a great amount of discussion on. And these things, even in social media, they are constants. And I think the media is learning to some extent from that, and there is capacity to indulge in the attention span of its audience.
Well, I might ask the second question. We've covered the first. I think simply institutions and organisations and corporations that do well, using social media are ones that are about people, because that's what social media is about. And so if you, and it is an ongoing conversation, and it jumps around, and you can't just say the same thing over and over again. You have to actually give people more detail. That's the way to keep people on the same topic, and that's what organisations need to do to keep people listening, and give them a chance to engage. And I think one of the challenges of being an organisation using social media is having an authentic voice in social media. And I know, when you've got an account that doesn't have someone's name, and doesn't actually have, there'll be more than one, if not very many people, just say tweeting or Facebooking from that account. It's hard to come up with a personality and a really definite kind of I don't know what the word is, persona, I suppose, about that account, and lots of organisations struggle with it, and it's been interesting watching Amnesty get a lot better at it, and just from a sort of observer, although sort of slightly inside observer, our Facebook account and our Twitter account have changed a lot, and they have made a very big effort. There's one person that manages it, and he has a personality, and it comes out, and it really sort of it shows, and it's taken off, and we now most of our refer us to our website, and the engagement on our Facebook page is amazing, with people having these crazy discussions about all these complicated human rights issues on our Facebook page, because they're sort of allowed to through the personality, I think, that comes through from the organisation.
Jump back.
I wanted to ask Sarah for a few more thoughts on the point that you raised, Sarah, about the fact that Facebook and so on are actually corporate entities, and we actually, I think, cede a lot of control to them. So I'm involved in some networks that are set up wholly on Facebook, for instance,
And for instance, I'm involved in some breastfeeding groups which are all about supporting women who are breastfeeding, and they've been shut down in an instant, numerous ones all over the world, because they have photos that people have posted breastfeeding their babies, and they're considered to be obscene by the owners of Facebook. It's happened over and over again, and when that network is gone in an instant, it has an enormous impact. So I just want to hear some more thoughts about that issue.
Well, should we be any more concerned about the concentration of power in the hands of one or two social media outlets than we are in one or two traditional media outlets?
Well, I think the concerns are the same. Facebook is probably the most concerning because it does. I mean, Twitter. I'm not aware that Twitter really censors. Does anybody know? I mean, obviously people can, say defamatory things. I've seen a lot of defamatory things on Twitter.
Talk of trending being modified, that is when things are happening, people say, why is this trending?
But not actually a tweet. It doesn't. I mean, it can't roam and stop a tweet going out. But it does. You're saying, and I think that's true. It does. It can manipulate what seems to be the most important or trending stories of the day. I think one reason for that is because if they in fact always put up what was trending number one, it would always be Justin Bieber. And that's actually true. I think trending works on the basis of the difference between what was trending before and what's trending now, because he's always trending number one. He's actually not trending at all. But with Facebook, I know that the Coloured Say website, that's Whale Donor's website, was his Facebook page was shut down in November last year, and there was a lot because he insisted on remaining anonymous for obvious reasons, and Facebook had to be really cajoled. In the end, they found someone in Washington who could take over as the official administrator of that site, who was willing to give their name. But that policy on anonymity has been a problem, and some US legislators have requested Facebook to drop it. Facebook, to be fair, said